jumping from a plane at 13,000 feet and free falling towards the earth, and then deploying your parachute and shooting forward at speeds of 100 miles per hour while navigating an obstacle course and trying to land with perfect accuracy. This is the realm of competitive skydiving, and we're going to find out what it's all about with Joey Allen right now. Hey guys, I'm Jesse Day, and welcome to the Performance Psychology Podcast, High Stakes Success. Today, we are joined by skydiving instructor and competitor, Joey Allen. Joey, how you doing today?
I'm good, Jesse. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Now, let's get right to it. Jumping out of a plane from how high in the air exactly?
Usually it's around 13 or 14,000 feet.
13 or 14,000 feet. So what is it that first drew you to skydiving, both from a casual level in the beginning and later on as a competitor?
You know, I'm not really sure exactly what triggered it. I think as a kid, I always had a dream of flying. It just really looked like a lot of fun. There was nothing deeper than that other than it just looked like a whole lot of fun. And it was something that I really, really wanted to try. Yeah.
So when you first went for your first skydive, what was the experience like for you? I guess just like a lot of people, I didn't really know what to expect. Right.
I didn't know what the process was going to be like, other than reading a couple of blurbs on a website. So I had like a full day of ground training, and then I went up and did the jump. My first jump was actually a solo jump.
Okay, usually people do it tandem, right, attached to an instructor.
Yeah, which is, I did my first jump 16 years ago, and a lot has changed in the skydiving industry.
Right.
Back then we did this method. It was called instructor-assisted deployment, where basically you do a full day of ground school, and then you'd wear your own parachute. You'd go up to about 3,000 or 4,000 feet. You'd climb out onto the strut of the airplane.
This sounds terrifying.
And then hang off by the wing. And then basically, as you would fall away, the instructor would throw a small parachute, which is called a pilot chute, and that would basically start the deployment sequence.
Okay, so you would be deployed pretty much as soon as you're jumping from the plane.
Yeah, basically a couple of seconds of free fall, and it's not really even free fall because your parachute's kind of deploying as you're falling away from the plane. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so that's one method. And then there's the tandem method. Now, I think that's the method that most people want to go with because, I know for me personally, if I was ever to do this, I would not I don't think I would be able to muster the courage to actually jump out of the plane all on my own by myself. I think that would be terrifying. So the idea of having an instructor with you who's, kind of in control of everything and who has a ton of experience, I think that's a lot more appealing. And these days, do people still solo jump for their first time, or is it almost across the board everybody's doing tandem?
There are some skydive centers that are doing that method. We kind of consider it a bit of an archaic method. And the nice thing about tandem skydiving is it lets you experience all aspects of skydiving in the safest, easiest, and fastest way.
Right.
So you can rock in with no previous experience. We can train you in 15 or 20 minutes. You get to do a free fall as long as an experienced jumper. You're going to get to fly the parachute around, and you're going to do all of this. I kind of like to say, like with training wheels, right?
Right.
You're an active participant in the skydive. We train you, and we want you to help us fly our bodies and fly the parachute through the air, but the instructor is essentially a set of training wheels.
Right. So talk a little bit about the ground training. You were mentioning that before you did your first solo jump, there was ground training involved. How does that training work? How long do you have to do it for before you actually do attempt a solo jump?
The ground school is pretty similar to what I mentioned before. So it's usually about 7 or 8 hours. We'll talk to you about, we'll give you an overview of the equipment, how it operates. We'll talk to you about free fall body position to maintain a nice stable position. Talk to you about how to fly the parachute, how to develop a landing pattern, what to do if there's a parachute malfunction, landing, any kind of unusual situations. And all of that, it's not just classroom. We get you down. You're actually physically rehearsing that stuff as well on the ground.
Right. So as an instructor, what would be your recommendation in terms of how many tandem jumps should somebody do before they do attempt a solo jump? Is it literally okay to just try one tandem and then if they feel confident, train them and go for the solo jump right after that?
Yeah, I mean, that's our process at Edmonton Skydive and at Vancouver Skydive. And it's similar with many other skydiving centers across the continent. I think that one is a good number. It's essentially so that people don't get too much sensory overload for one,
right,
when they're doing a solo jump, because on a solo jump, their tasks, they have specific tasks that they need to complete, right?
Right, yeah.
And then the other part of it is when you're on your first jump, we just want you to soak it up, experience it. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to process. Physiologically, there's a lot going on with your body, and there's a lot going on in your brain. And if you do at least one tandem, it just lets you kind of soak that all up.
Right.
Without too much stress, just to kind of be in the moment and experience it.
That makes a lot of sense. For me personally, I'm very terrified of jumping out of an airplane. It sounds like I'm scared of heights in general. I'm sure a lot of people are. What would you say most first-time jumpers experiences in terms of, are they very nervous or scared most of the time, or do you get a lot of people who are confident as well?
It's extremely common to be completely nervous on your first jump. Sometimes people rock up and they say that they're not nervous, but in my experience, I've taken about 3,000 people on a tandem skydive. And, when it comes right down to door opened, make your way towards the door, feet on the edge. Everybody is nervous. It's not something that we have been prepared for. It's not something that even most people do. Only about 5% of people are ever going to do a skydive.
Right, and I guess from like just a human instinct, like the brain itself, operating on kind of a primal level, is kind of screaming danger, danger, because, you're on the edge of a plane and you're about to jump to what would be perceived as your death if you were not, attached to an instructor or a parachute. So I think on that primal level, the brain has to just experience a lot of fear.
For sure. I mean, for 50, 60,000 years of evolution, that's what our biological composition was.
Yeah.
It was to protect ourselves from dangerous situations.
Right.
But I think the thing about that is we're using our old brain in a modern scenario, right? We have tools and teaching methods and skills that reduce, I don't want to say eliminate, because obviously
Right.
going to zero is impossible, but we have made skydiving so safe that there's still a disconnect between that old, survival fight or flight mentality with the actual safety level of skydiving today.
Yeah, it's very safe, right? Like it's practically impossible for someone to have a mishap, I would imagine.
It is very safe. Tandem skydiving is extremely safe. For example, in Canada, there hasn't been a tandem fatality in over 35 years.
Wow.
Something like that, 30, 35 years. And as you can imagine, the advancement in parachute technology and training techniques has improved exponentially in 30 years.
And I'm assuming it continues to improve, or has it kind of reached the peak of perfection in terms of safety and having everything operate perfectly?
I mean, it's interesting. 15 years ago, I would have thought that we were at a pretty advanced stage, and every year there seems to be continual improvement in the gear, in the performance of the equipment. I mean, without a doubt, right now the operator is the weakest link in the chain, right?
So it's basically up to the jumper or the instructor in this case to make sure everything goes smoothly. But that's pretty cool that it continues to evolve year by year. Now, as I mentioned, I'm terrified of this. A lot of people are. What do you think you could say are the benefits or advantages of actually doing it? What could you say to possibly convince me or the listeners and viewers who might be very hesitant about this idea that jumping out of a plane at 13,000 feet is worth it, is something that they should do?
Well, I mean, the first thing I might do is ask you why. Why do you have that fear?
Right.
What is it? Like, can you drill down into what exactly it is?
Like for me, I'm quite afraid of being in a plane. Not so much. I'm more afraid of takeoff. That part kind of freaks me out because at that point, I think you have such a perception of yourself, like and your relative distance from the ground. When way up in the air in a plane, looking out of the window and stuff, I'm totally cool. I'm like, this is fine. If there's a lot of turbulence, I get kind of freaked out. But just that sense of leaving the ground kind of freaks me out. I've been paragliding a few times, I think 2 or 3 times, and I was also terrified each time. So I think it's just some sort of fear I have of not necessarily heights. For example, I'm not really scared of standing on a tall building and looking down. That doesn't scare me. Like I don't have vertigo or anything. It's just a sense of, I guess, in a way, it's a loss of control, and that's what kind of scares me about being in a plane as well. Is like, okay, I don't have control over anything. I'm kind of sitting in this massive machine that's flying through the air that I have no control over. So I think, in a way, maybe that's part of my fear is the loss of control, and then it just seems to be some sort of natural fear of heights. I think it's that primal thing that maybe exists in the old part of the brain, as you were mentioning.
Right. I mean, it's interesting what you say because you specifically said something like, if you were on the edge of a building, you wouldn't be afraid. You don't have afraid of heights. But personally, for me, if I was standing on the edge of a building without a parachute, I would be terrified.
I mean, let me clarify that. I don't mean standing right on the edge because that freaks me out. Because I guess I have this fear sometimes that if I'm on the edge of something, that somehow my body will fail and I'll, be unable to control my motor functions and I'll somehow slip and fall, which is kind of ridiculous. But like, I mean, as long as there's some sort of barrier or wall coming up to at least like maybe my chest and I'm looking over the building, then I'm cool. But actually standing on the precipice is not something I'd be cool with.
Well, I mean, I think it's. I think the biggest thing is an unknown or lack of information, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about people get in a car every day, and we all know that they can be very dangerous, but people think nothing of it, right?
Absolutely.
The thing about it is, again, skydiving techniques and skydiving equipment have evolved so much that they have reduced the risk to almost zero. To just give you an example, so on skydiving equipment, we have small computers, onboard computers, and they're called automatic activation devices. And essentially what happens is it's a backup redundant safety device. But if you got unconscious, you're knocked unconscious when you left the airplane.
Sure.
The little onboard computer detects altitude and speed. So if you're going through the air and you're at an altitude where the computer says you should have a parachute open, but you're still at free fall speed, it automatically will fire out a reserve parachute.
Oh, so there's like a computer attached to the jumper as well, or some sort of device?
It's on the parachute system.
Okay.
There are a number of backup safety devices like that built into skydiving equipment these days, but nobody knows that, right? The average person who comes to do their first skydive has very little exposure to it.
Sure.
Whereas if you compare that to just driving around in a car, they're in cars all the time. They have a general idea of how they're built, how they operate, all that kind of stuff. But that's not the same for skydiving. And I think that just that general unknown, if people were exposed more to how parachutes operated, kind of what the real statistics are. The media tends to not really portray skydiving particularly well. Anytime you hear a media report, which is not representative of it at all.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. I think it's just generally the unknown. I think the other thing is, you kind of mentioned it as well too, is the trust level, letting go. I think that's one of the amazing things that skydiving teaches you. It's just a certain level of trust. So you learn to trust your gear, right? So that there's no gear fear.
Sure.
You know that the gear is very sophisticated, technologically advanced, that you have been trained and endorsed to a certain level. Or if you're doing a tandem skydive, that you're riding on board with somebody who has thousands of skydives.
Right.
So I think that the fear is just misplaced. Now, of course, there is that, biological desire to stay alive, and physiologically your body's going to tell you to not do this. But, everything you want is on the other side of fear.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Now, I wanted to touch a little bit on, well, actually not just a little bit, a lot, on the competitive aspect of skydiving, because this is something that I wasn't completely aware of. I mean, you see stuff like people doing formations in the air in movies or on videos and stuff like that, but there's actually more to competitive skydiving than just that. Could you run us through what competitive skydiving is actually all about, what the different variations are and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, skydiving is not just, you go and jump off an airplane one time and it's a good time. There's a whole sport, a culture, a lifestyle behind it. And over 40 years, several disciplines have developed, and people commit a fair amount of time and money to compete in these. So skydiving is really, I always say that skydiving is like two sports in one, and not many sports can say that. It's the free fall part and the parachute part. So in free fall, in terms of competitive disciplines, it's mostly formation skydiving. Now that breaks down into a bunch of different subcategories. So there's just formation skydiving, typically in 4 or 8 person teams, where people will leave the airplane and they're flying belly to earth, and they need to create as many different formations. They're predetermined formations, and they need to create those within 35 seconds of exiting the airplane.
Okay. And how many members are on a team?
So it's either 4 or 8.
Okay.
And then there's also vertical formation. It's the same concept, only people are flying, instead of belly to earth, vertically. So either head down relative to the earth or head up relative to the earth.
Interesting. Wow, there's a lot of variations already. And what about the deployment aspect of the sport?
Yeah, so on the parachute side, there's kind of the most classic competitive discipline is just classic accuracy, where there's I forget what it is, maybe 8-meter diameter tuffet. And basically you need to fly your parachute and get as close to the bullseye as possible. But kind of one of the more spectator friendly and kind of exciting disciplines is canopy piloting. And that's where the jumpers will fly really small, high performance parachutes, and they fly them over top of ponds. And basically they'll do a turn around 1,000 feet above the ground to generate a lot of vertical speed. They'll dive the parachute towards the ground, building speeds of 80 to 100 miles an hour towards the ground.
Wow.
And And then as they come close to the ground, they're kind of pulling the parachute out of the dive and converting all that energy into forward horizontal speed.
Yeah, I've seen some video of this. So it's very interesting how the actual speed that the jumpers are going forward as opposed to down once they reach the part where they're and you guys actually navigate. There's like pylons set up within the ponds, and you actually navigate through them, right?
Yeah. In terms of canopy piloting, there's kind of three subcategories. So there's speed, distance, and zone accuracy. So in speed, exactly what you said, you're navigating your parachute through a 70-meter carved course.
Okay.
And those pylons, those gates, are 5 feet. So you need to fly your body through those, through 5 sets of those, which go 70 meters. And there's probably a 70 to 90 degree kind of carve. So whoever goes through those gates the fastest gets the best score. And then distance, you have to drag water before that first gate, and then essentially go as far as you can. And then in zone accuracy, the objective is to navigate the parachute through all 5 sets of gates, dragging as much water as you can, and then getting in the zone on land that is worth the most amount of points.
Okay, so from these different disciplines of the sport, it seems to me like the canopy piloting, the one where you're deploying, holds the greatest element of potential danger. Am I right on that? Simply because you're going at such a fast speed that if you were to hit the ground going, 90 or 100 miles per hour, is it miles per hour, right?
Yeah, miles. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like is there an element of danger involved?
There's definitely an element of it's pretty spectacular to watch.
Right.
There is certainly, I would say, it is the most dangerous discipline. But the pond actually adds quite an element, quite a margin for safety. But
right.
for sure, when you're traveling at those speeds towards the ground, it can be dangerous.
So do jumpers get injured sometimes during these competitions?
Sometimes it's pretty rare though. Or if there's an injury, it's kind of a minor injury,
right.
Sprained ankle or whatever. I mean, you need to keep in mind that this is not something that you would do when you have 20 skydives or even 200 skydives. Most of the people that are competing at a serious level have thousands of skydives.
Wow. So an element of experience is absolutely needed before a person would make the jump from, skydiving casually for fun to actually entering these kind of intense competitions.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely a progression from the time that you show up to do your first tandem and then become a solo jumper to that, right? So for example, when you first become a student, like a solo student, you would be flying a parachute that is somewhere in the area of 260 to 280 square feet.
Okay.
I fly a parachute that's 75 square feet.
So is that harder to control and maneuver?
Well, it has a lot higher performance. The envelope of performance is exponentially higher. But it's a double-edged sword, right? You need to be able to harness that performance as well.
Sure.
The student parachutes are significantly larger and more docile, so that if you make a mistake, they're significantly more forgiving.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. Now, you recently competed in a big skydiving competition. Could you tell us what the competition was and how your experience was there?
Yeah, I just recently came back from the Canadian National Skydiving Championships. So I went there, and I was competing in canopy piloting, and I went there with the objective to make the national team. So the top 8 people in the competition get to go on and represent Canada in the World Championships. And I was very fortunate. I had a good few days, and I managed to make the team. I got 7th overall.
Great.
And I took first place in zone accuracy.
Wow. So you're going to be representing Canada in the World Skydiving Competitions.
Yeah.
And when is that going to be taking place?
It's next summer in Poland.
In Poland. Wow, that's awesome. So people from all around the world, basically the best of the best in terms of skydivers, are going to be there to compete in all of these disciplines you've been talking about?
Yeah, well, actually, what they do now is they these events have actually gotten so large that they kind of separate some of the disciplines.
Okay.
So the one in, I believe the one in Poland is just going to be the parachute discipline. So most likely just canopy piloting and accuracy and the other parachute disciplines.
Well, that's amazing. Definitely keep us up to date as it moves forward and after the competition. Perhaps we can have you on again next year after the Worlds and talk about what that experience was like.
That'd be great. Maybe we could have a follow up one after you come do a jump as well.
Well, maybe we'll have to see. I'll have to throw out some if this video gets 1 million views, I'll jump out of a plane. That's how it's done these days. So how are the competitions judged? How does it work in terms of deciding who gets the most points or who's the winner? Is there a panel of judges? And especially during the formations, is there somebody free falling with you with a camera to be filming them on which judges are watching on a monitor or something?
Yeah, the free fall disciplines. There's a in-air videographer that jumps with the team, and then what they'll do is they'll bring the video back. After they land, they'll bring them into the judges, and then they watch them on the TV.
And then they kind of use their own judgment. I'm assuming all the judges are also professional skydivers themselves with a ton of experience.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a very stringent set of guidelines in how they determine whether a team got this formation or they didn't get the formation. So basically, that's why there's a panel. There's 4 or 5 of them, and they kind of the majority needs to rule that this formation was made and the next formation was made, etc.
Right. I want to talk about skydiving in terms of how it can impact people in their daily lives outside of the actual jump. I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons that first-time jumpers go, whether it's to overcome fears, overcome some sort of maybe mental block that they may have, and try to improve their own lives. So in your own experience and the experience of people that you've jumped with, whether it be first-timers or experienced jumpers or even competitors, what are some ways that you would say that skydiving impacts people's lives on a day-to-day basis?
One of the coolest things about being an instructor is just that you get to share that experience with everybody, and for many people it's one of their biggest dreams. It's going to be one of the most profound things that they ever do in their life. Like I would say, top 5 memorable things that they're going to do in their life, and it is just such a super cool thing to be there. In that moment when you're about to leave the airplane, because it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter if you're a doctor, lawyer, police officer, if you're a student, if you're 90 years old or 14 years old, is that everybody is in the same mindset at that particular moment. And I think that's just the coolest thing in the world. And I think for most people it's very empowering. Right? Like I said, it would be extremely rare the number of people that are genuinely comfortable or fully relaxed the moment that you're at the door.
Sure.
Now, something amazing happens within the first 2 seconds. If you ask anybody who's ever skydived, and they were and if you ask them about the fear, well, they're like, yes, I was very afraid those first couple seconds. But everybody, 100% of people within the first couple seconds, that just magically goes away.
Wow.
They have just embraced it and they're fully in the moment and just enjoying it. So I think that it's pretty empowering that you can be in that, presented with that situation where you have so much fear, but you know that you just need to do that one thing to experiencing something amazing. And so if you can do that, then why can't you do anything else?
Right. I guess once you've jumped out of a plane from 13,000 feet, other challenges in life could seem much smaller in comparison.
Yeah, for sure. If you think about it, lots of people have massive fears of public speaking, starting a business, quitting their job,
Pursuing their dream, yeah.
Pursuing their dream. If you can do this, why can't you do any of those?
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I mean, kind of going back to what you said earlier, trust is, it definitely teaches you a little bit of trust. If you come to a skydive center, do your first jump, you're probably only going to spend 15 or 20 minutes with your tandem instructor before you board up on the airplane. So there's certainly that element of trust just in another human being that, oh, okay, this person is trained and the equipment is great and I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to let go and enjoy the moment.
Awesome. Now, final question. We're all about high performance professional level on this podcast. So I want your advice to somebody who's been skydiving casually for a long time, like you said, or not necessarily casually, but seriously for 2,000 plus jumps, and now they want to make the transition to the competitive world of skydiving. What would you say are the best things that they can do to reach that level? What would you say the attributes they need to have, like mentally as a competitor are? And what sort of training would they need to start going through to make the jump to being a competitive skydiver?
I would say just like do it. It's an incredible thing to compete, and it's going to make you a better skydiver. You know, the interesting thing about skydiving competitions is there is a massive amount of camaraderie. I think that it's different. I played all kinds of other sports, and in other sports there's, team camaraderie obviously, but this is like people are helping other competitors out, and there's lots of high fives and hugging and all that kind of stuff. So the camaraderie of it is, and competing in skydiving is just kind of a very special thing. But in terms of starting to go down that path, certainly coaching is absolutely critical. It's critical for fast, rapid progression. I would also say you just have to make a dedication to it. I kind of tinkered around in this for like 4 or 5 years, and the results were the results kind of mirrored my dedication to it. And just in the last couple of years, I kind of made a real commitment that I really wanted to pursue this. And I did a lot of training. I did a lot of coaching. I did a lot of training camps. I put the time in, and some of the results started to come. So I think that you just have to be dedicated to get the coaching. There definitely is. You have to make a commitment to the mental and kind of physical training as well too. Skydiving is really interesting because it's not like hockey where you can go out and spend 3 hours on the ice, or golf where you can go hit 5 buckets of balls in an hour.
Yeah.
We're talking, the free fall disciplines are 60 seconds at a time. The canopy disciplines are 2.5 minutes at a time. And just by the nature of it, there's only so many times a day you can go up, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
You have a very small, thin slice of the amount of actual training. So you need to really focus on the mental side because that's just the available tools, right?
So by visualizing the jump?
We do a ton of visualizing. We'll visualize it and actually physically walk out the movements. And try to imagine what it would feel like, and counting out different moves, trying to see sight pictures, and trying to kind of duplicate that in our mind, and as we physically rehearse it.
That's awesome. I think that the visualization aspect for this particular sport seems like it's perhaps the most important out of any sport. I mean, the one that I could probably say maybe comes in second is mixed martial arts or combat sports, where you very often hear of those athletes visualizing their success in the ring. But the thing is, they can spar as much as they want, right? So they can actually replicate the real event pretty much as they'd like to do. But in this instance, it seems so important because you cannot replicate the event as much as you want. The fact that you have to take the plane all the way up, and for free falling, it's 60 seconds, and for the canopy piloting, you were saying it was like 2.5 minutes. But like you said, it's impractical. You can't do that, 20 times in a day, I imagine. So the visualization aspect seems to be the most literally applicable to this sport than any other that I've ever heard of.
Yeah, particularly in the parachute disciplines. Now, there has been rapid expansion of wind tunnels, vertical wind tunnels,
Right.
throughout Canada and the U.S., which simulates free fall incredibly. It does do a very good job, and so the free fall skills of skydivers has just increased exponentially over the last 10 years because these tunnels are going up in all major cities. But in the parachute stuff, there's no wind tunnel for flying a parachute.
Right.
So definitely physical rehearsals, visualization, huge part of it.
Well, this has been a super fascinating conversation. You've given a ton of insight into skydiving. I don't know if I'm convinced to go yet. We'll have to see.
What is it? 1 million? 1 million?
1 million. That might be a little high. I'll say if we're on YouTube, if this gets oh geez, I don't want to set a number now because people. I'll say 50,000 views, and I'll do it. That's terrifies me so much.
I'm looking forward to taking you on a skydive.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens. Now, where can people find you online? You work for both Vancouver Skydive and Edmonton Skydive. If people want to jump with your company or just find out more information, where can they find you?
If you're in Vancouver, we operate the only skydiving center in Metro Vancouver. It's incredible. We'll take you for a scenic flight over Golden Ears Mountains and through the Indian Arm. And the views are incredible. You get to skydive right by the mountains and you get to see the city. It's incredible. So you can find us at vancouverskydive.com. Or if you're in Alberta, we operate one of the largest skydiving centers in the country, one of the biggest student training programs in the country with just some incredible facilities. You can find us at edmontonskydive.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And we will definitely keep updated with your progress as time goes by in your competitive life as well. And hopefully we can have you back on to discuss that later.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you. Have a great day. So there you have it. Skydiving competitor and instructor Joey Allen giving us some insight into something that I mentioned scares me a lot, jumping out of a plane at 13,000 feet. Some great advice on skydiving and how to approach it in general. And it was very fascinating to hear about the impact it has on people's daily lives as well. Our show is on YouTube as well as iTunes and other podcast directories. And as I was mentioning to Joey, if this gets 50,000 views on YouTube, I will jump out of a plane. I'm so scared to do this. I'm not even going to set a time limit on it. If a year from now it hits 50,000, I'm going to jump. You people can hold me to that. And I will, of course, make a video about that and post that as well if it happens. Please don't watch this video. So as I mentioned, we're on iTunes as well as YouTube, as well as SoundCloud. If you could rate us on iTunes, that would really help us out a lot. If you're on YouTube, please do leave a comment letting us know what you think of the show with any questions you have, and give us a like as well. And as always, you can find us and all the latest episodes at highstakessuccess.com. So until next time, remember, when the stakes are high, success is the only option.